Hello, my name is William Lewis. I'm CEO of Dow Jones and I'm publisher of the Wall Street Journal. Good afternoon and welcome to this panel discussion on innovation, talent and trust, brought to you by Accenture and which is being televised live on WEF18. I can absolutely promise you that this will be the most interesting, if not the most efficient, panel of WEF so far. So get ready to learn a lot over the course of the next 30 minutes. Firstly, a big thank you to Accenture for hosting us today. We have three industry leaders, each bringing a different experience and perspective. I'll introduce them shortly, but if you have a question you'd like me to ask them, please use the comment section on Facebook or on Twitter using hashtag #CEOOutlook. Hashtag #CEOOutlook. So first up, Devin Wenig, President and CEO of eBay. Devin joined eBay in September 2011 after more than 18 years at Thomson Reuters. He is known as a sports fan, avid runner, amateur coder, and keen arts enthusiast. Apart from ensuring the continued success of everyone's favorite e-commerce site, he is passionate about using technology to make a positive impact on communities around the world. Bernard Tyson, Chairman and CEO of Kaiser Permanente, an integrated healthcare consortium which manages a staggering 220,000 employees and 22,000 physicians, focused on providing affordable, accessible, high-quality healthcare and improving the healthcare of its members and communities. Bernard is one of the leading voices on healthcare reform. Indeed, Modern Healthcare magazine has named him the most influential healthcare executive for 4 consecutive years. And Julie Sweet, CEO of North America for Accenture. Julie is responsible for leading Accenture's business in the United States, the company's largest market, and Canada. She is also a member of Accenture's Global Management Committee. Since assuming her role, Julie has demonstrated a deep commitment to creating an environment where Accenture's people can be successful both professionally and personally. Now, we have a very short 29 minutes now to explore the role of CEOs in maintaining America's position as a global leader in innovation, growth, and competitiveness. Corporate leaders know that their own companies and the US economy as a whole need to embrace innovation to avoid disruption from both local and global competitors. I'll shortly ask the panelists to share their views on the opportunities new technologies create for the economy, our workforce, and our society, as well as the challenges they present. But to begin, as publisher of the Wall Street Journal, the world's leading newspaper, I have the privilege of speaking daily with leading CEOs in America. And I can confidently report that there is a real and growing sense of public and private optimism. In fact, CEOs are showing signs of those important animal spirits that they have not shown or felt for quite some time. So let's get going. So Julie, to you first, welcome.
Thank you.
Animal spirits, optimism, go get 'em. How are you feeling as the CEO of North America of Accenture?
Well, we're sharing the optimism that you're hearing from the other CEOs you're talking to and that we're seeing from our clients who are optimistic. We're talking a lot about investment in growth, using technology for growth. Moving away from conversations that are mostly around efficiencies. And I think, here at Davos, that's particularly important because, as you know, our theme here is shared values in a fractured world. And one of the things I think a lot about is how do we make sure that as we're going into, what looks very consistent, across the globe, the highest growth since 2011, how do we make sure that that growth is growth that is inclusive? Right, and so we talk a lot about at Accenture innovation with purpose, and really thinking about as leaders, both at Accenture and helping our clients make sure that we're not only seizing these opportunities for ourselves, which we have responsibilities to our shareholders, but for wider benefit of society. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Devin. Innovation with purpose, animal spirits. Where are you at?
Well, first of all, look, I think we're operating in a confident market. We're a consumer internet company. We reflect the purchasing habits of consumers around the world. They're showing signs of confidence. They're spending. We just came out of what looks like a very strong holiday season. So the market is robust, probably the most robust since I joined eBay 6 years ago.
So the most robust for 6 years?
Just in terms of the external environment.
Okay.
I do think that we need to be just a bit cautious that it also feels like it is a volatile environment. It feels like there is a fracture on the political side, on the risk. So we do feel good. We are unleashing animal spirits. We do feel like investing. We think things like the U.S. tax reform was an excellent step. However, it doesn't feel like a stable, simple environment. It also, while it feels robust, it also feels potentially volatile. So we're watching things like tail risk, political risks, and other things around the world.
So cautious optimism,
Yeah.
Bit by bit. Most profound risk that you feel at the moment?
Right now, I would say regulatory risk is up there. I think, interestingly enough, while in some markets regulation has been reduced, we also see the risk that there may be increased regulation, particularly of technology. So for us in the short run, that's something we're watching carefully.
Interesting. Okay. Bernard, you have an extraordinary view of what's happening in America through this extremely fast-growing company of yours. Tell us where you are at with your animal spirits.
Well, I think it's a tale of two cities. I think on one hand, there's no question that as the economy is getting better and better, it's reflective in compensation to employees in major companies around the country that we are blessed to take care of through Kaiser Permanente, their employees. At the same time, we have issues about how to deal with the poor, the working poor, and the other end of the continuum. And so affordability is still the centerpiece. I'm optimistic that organizations like Kaiser Permanente is focused on this and coming up with innovative ways to deliver the value proposition for less. And so I think we have a real opportunity to address both ends of those spectrums. And you know, healthcare is at this critical stage of, I would say, the beginning of a real transformation away from the historical perspective of how healthcare is provided, a hospital setting, and then everything around it, to different access points along the continuum, from the use of an iPhone, in which we leverage technology now, which has opened up all kinds of access possibilities for people, to when do you use a high-tech center like a hospital or a comprehensive care center like we invest in Kaiser Permanente.
Okay, and while you've got the baton, tell us a bit more about how you're embracing technology and how you're leading into the fourth industrial revolution.
We think there are real possibilities on this journey. At the same time, I have been clear that the technology is to augment the business that we're in, which is humans working with and for humans.
Right.
So the human touch in healthcare is still critically important. And so the technology makes that happen better, and we believe that strongly. And it also opens up access points that historically we've not had to deal with. And take, for example, last year we did more virtual primary care visits than we did actual physical visits. So it means that our members are getting more time to interact with their physicians in a very different setting, and we call it care anywhere. And our physicians, which are part of the Permanente medical groups in Kaiser Permanente, are now working to redefine how to think about how to deal with this new demand. And this new demand is giving us an opportunity to innovate around how would we address healthcare in the 21st century. And then the last piece is now we're working with regulators who are regulating us to the third industrial revolution, if you will. And now we need to revise some of those regulatory requirements that brings into line how we think about AI and technology in organizations like Kaiser Permanente.
So regulators playing catch up in your instance. So Julie, you thank you for that, fascinating. Julie, you advise, work with companies across so many different sectors, including healthcare. Is the picture that Bernard just painted a similar picture across a range of different sectors? That particularly, I'm thinking about that human element that's very heartening, but is it the case in other sectors as well, or are we going to see, as companies and industries embrace AI more aggressively, that it's actually more about cost and taking out the human?
Well, I think to date, when you look at artificial intelligence in particular, right, it has been a lot about efficiencies. And in fact, a lot of the conversation around technology and disruption is about starting companies with no people and, sort of the disrupting of entire industries. And we're really starting to see the shift around what we call people first, right? And the power, in fact, of artificial intelligence is around what Bernard was talking about, which is artificial intelligence to augment humans. We talk about it giving humans superpowers. And as we sort of take a step back and look at our business, artificial intelligence by far, if you look at, the last 30 years, is the fastest technology trend. The change that's happened in the last 2 years and how fast it's coming is enormous. We've got hundreds of projects, thousands of people working on them. And what we see is that the power, though, to transform and to really change comes with this interaction between the human and the machine. And to borrow a healthcare example, I'm a breast cancer survivor, and I love the example of the Harvard pathologist who did a test and said humans, reading pathology accuracy against the machines. It was 96% humans, 92% machines. But when they put it together and the machines augmented the humans, they got to 99.5% accuracy. And we're seeing those kinds of trends in solving other important both business and society problems, going after illicit funds, a $3 trillion global problem. It is not getting solved by simply using machine learning, but we have solutions that are using its people process technology together to solve a real problem. And so, as we think about the shift that's happening with artificial intelligence, it's not about the technology, it's about the problem you're going to solve, and it's how technology can enable humans and companies to solve that problem better.
Okay, thank you for that. So Devin, superhuman powers. You run a technology company. You are a human. Do you feel like you have superhuman powers?
Iron Man, not Terminator. But that's a good analogy about augmenting humans, not replacing them. I think we're in an incredibly exciting period, and to coin a phrase, you ain't seen nothing yet. If you look at the way we view the world from Silicon Valley, the big impacts on the world come when these computing platforms change or shift. Applications are big and impactful, but they pale in comparison to the platforms. eBay's an application. Google is an application. Facebook is an application. So you say, how can anything dwarf that? But of course, the platform was the internet. And the platform was mobile. And those come around few and far between, but we're on the precipice of 3 major shifts coming at once. And those are AI, and augmented and virtual reality, and the Internet of Things. And each of them is a platform, not an application. And we don't even know yet what companies are going to be spawned by these new platforms. But we do know that they are going to be incredibly impactful to billions of people around the world. We're just now at the very beginning of these platforms getting to scale and being mature enough to breed new applications and platforms. I think the question that you asked directly is what kind of world is that going to be? And there's a real debate about that, quite honestly. I think there are companies that look at that world, or people that look at that world as a cold and robotic world that's job is to replace humans. That's certainly not me personally. I'm an optimist, and that's not our company. In many ways, eBay as a marketplace is an enabler of other businesses. It's an enabler in particular of small business. So when we look at our role is to harness these big technology forces and make it work for people, make it work for small businesses. A small business that sells on eBay, and there are millions of them, don't have the data, and they don't have an AI department, and they can't target hundreds of millions of people around the world. They're just entrepreneurs trying to sell stuff. Our job is to use this incredible reach and platform and harness these platforms and allow this 3-person business that I just left in Akron, Ohio, to become a 10-person business because they're now selling around the world. So I think it's really exciting. There'll be winners and losers, but I'm really optimistic about the way the world's going to look in this new paradigm.
Bernard, you're nodding.
Yeah, no, I definitely share that view. I think we collectively have no idea about the bright future in terms of work being defined differently because of what we're on the edge of seeing happen more and more. And if you go back and look at the other 3 industrial revolutions, you'll see the commonalities of some of the things we're talking about that happened in historical context. And so if there's any comfort, we're on familiar ground. We're going into the unknown, right? I think the second thing is I'm clearly on the side of technology is going to augment. And part of it is also, if I was coming to work every day and I felt that the leadership was actively trying to figure out how to get rid of me, just think how I would feel coming to work every day, committed to the mission of this organization.
Particularly as you own the company, Bernard, this would be...
And so it doesn't make sense because, in fact, in our industry, of course, doctors and nurses and you go along the entire continuum, environmental services workers are experts with a lot of knowledge and capabilities.
Yeah.
This is where we have the opportunity of really augmenting to create the 99%. And so figuring out how this is an all-inclusive strategy where we're learning and growing together, I would offer as a much better value proposition than having your whole workforce on the sidelines feeling like what's going to happen tomorrow, as opposed to I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but I am a part of creating that.
Okay.
With this organization I'm committing myself to.
But Julie, I want you to come here. So what we seem to be saying is change is coming. One of those 3 enormous change is going to impact in some way. We don't quite know how, but we're feeling optimistic about it. We don't want to give the message to our colleagues that we're trying to find a way to get rid of their jobs. But what's certain is they're going to have to change the way they do their jobs. We're going to have to educate current workforce and workforce coming through. Can you just talk a bit about your perspective on that and what should companies and governments be doing to prepare the existing workforce and the workforce of the future to get ready for what we don't quite know is going to happen?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to get comfortable with what Bernard said, which is we don't know, right? And I think sometimes we spend so much time talking about are the robots rising and which jobs are going to go away that we're not focusing enough on what we do know, which is jobs are going to change and we need different skills. And so, we just did some research that said, we had 1,200 executives and they talked about 50% said they didn't have enough skills for artificial intelligence to take that. But when we asked them, well, how many of you are going to significantly increase your budgets for training, only 3% were going to make a change. And so what we really see is that we've got to change the equation of, it's not just spend more on technology, but it's actually having a talent strategy that is reskilling and that is connecting with the academic institutions and the not-for-profits in the community to start preparing, both to reskill and to have the right inputs. And there is a lot of work to do, but you can, we call it digital rescaling at scale, right? That is possible. We look at Accenture. We have 200,000 people over the last 2 years who we have skilled from awareness on up. There's different levels around new IT. Because as we shifted our business, even if you were willing to leave your workers behind, you can't find all of the skills, right? And so we do think that we need more of a focus on how we're going to reskill and have that be really part of the talent strategy of leaders of today's organization.
Is there a role for government in helping to achieve this?
Absolutely. Part of the role for government, and depending on the country, it's local or federal, is around the educational system. So, in the U.S., I'm a huge proponent that computer science for all is critical in the K through 12 education. Okay. So, there's an important role for the government and the private sector to work together to understand what the demand is, what are the skills, and then how are we going to provide access for all for those skills. And that's going to be a combination. It's not a one-size-fits-all, and neither the private sector nor the government can actually solve this independently.
Okay. So, Devin, you obviously run a technology company. Are you aware of the sense of responsibility that, as a technology leader, you have for these broader changes that society is going to have to embrace? And is your peer group similarly imbued with this sense of responsibility?
I think so. I don't think that means the answers are easy, but I do think there's a deep sense that technology leaders are having a disproportionate impact on billions of people around the world. And that means a number of things. And you saw this year, technology was scrutinized in a way that it probably hasn't been in many, many years. There were issues about the content that people receive. There were issues about privacy. Mm-hmm. There were issues about trade. I think the responsibility is everything from, and I share what Julie said, there should be a national priority to make computer science education mandatory. Right. We may not know.
You agree with Julie on that?
I think it's actually, I'd go even further and say, while we're having a national debate about immigration, the other side of that coin has to be a national debate about education.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Because if the debate is that we're bringing people who are replacing jobs, then we need to create more qualified candidates.
Yeah.
And the truth is that we may not know what all the jobs are, but we know they're all going to be digitally enabled.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a certainty. So that's one thing, and we promote that as a technology industry.
Right. Okay, the questions are pouring in on Twitter, so I want to get at least one in, if that's okay. And we are actually down to our last 8 minutes, so for folk out there watching, don't hesitate to ask your question, which I'll try and squeeze in. But Bernard, can I ask you to pick up this one here, which is, how do you think that corporates, in inverted commas, make sure they earn the trust of citizens? Also, interestingly, in inverted commas, Bernard.
Yeah, but I mean, at the end of the day, well before this question came up, and it's a great question. On one hand, the biggest asset that I have is trust. So literally, people are putting their trust and health in our hands at times, doing the most delicate issues that one can imagine. And so trust is there. Now, beyond that, at the second level is the trust of the workforce. It's the trust that we are true to our mission and they are included on that journey. The third part is to the greater community that includes members of our communities in which we exist. On my team, I have a chief community health officer, and his job is to look out for the interests of the 65 million people in which we are fortunate to take care of 12 million. Because health for us is part of the whole ecosystem. It's not just the lane of medical care. It's how is food being provided in the communities around the areas in which we exist. How's safety? How's the economy? All those things are ingredients to health and health care. And so we work very hard to earn and keep the trust. And then we have paying customers, the government, employers, and others, that we have to continue to prove the value proposition. And so that's all a part of it. You know, one final thing, I don't want to make it sound like I'm suggesting that there's a contradiction here. Work as we know it today will change. So I'm not guaranteeing a job. I'm guaranteeing there's a journey that we're on, that we grow in. And it has to also work inside of our model, that as we grow more, because we're delivering on the value proposition, we have greater opportunities to do newer things. So that's the formula that works in our situation.
And I must ask you, it's not exactly on point, but with your optimism and the way you're going to infuse the human and the machine, are we all going to end up living longer and healthily?
If I have my way, absolutely.
Good.
Starting with me, I want to live at least to 125.
125. Okay. We'll see what we can do. Julia, can you pick up this story? Because this question, because it's a really vital question, and there is. In the old days, we used to put more on governments, didn't we? But corporates are now assuming so much more responsibility for these extraordinary challenges. Do we feel comfortable about that? Because we're asking corporates to fill huge spaces and to try and provide certainty in what we've already agreed is an extremely uncertain world at the moment, and it's going to be even more uncertain going forward.
Well, I don't think there's really a choice, right? Because the problems that we're facing and the opportunities we have, almost all of them are we're going to require the corporates and the government to work together.
Right.
And so even the promise of, we know we need to, feed more people in the next 50 years than in the combined last 10,000 years, right? That solution is going to come from the private sector and technology. It's going to come from government in terms of distribution. I mean, these are big problems that need to get solved, and corporates have to play a role. I think what's important as we think about trust is, there's been a lot of debate. In fact, here in Davos, there's been a lot of discussion about CEOs speaking up more over the last year and that. And I think in a year, you're going to see that the discussion is less about should CEOs speak up, but what are the actions that companies are taking, more than speaking up, but how are we actually working together, both as companies as well as with government. So, for example, in Chicago, there's a group of companies that we're part of that are working together to create apprenticeships. The police chief there said, if you could create 10,000 apprenticeships, that would do more to eliminate crime in one of the worst cities in terms of crime than anything else we can do, right? And so here we are working together to solve the problem. So I don't think we have a choice, and I think we have to continue to really move the pendulum away from like a debate about the choice and speaking up to what are the actions that we're all taking. And I think Devin and Bernard are just great examples of companies that are taking real action. So.
And also leadership. I mean, we've got
Yes.
CEOs watching this who will hear the message that this is a period where leaders like you really do need to, and our two other guests do need to show leadership, don't they?
They do, and I think it's incumbent on all of us as CEOs to be training the leaders that are coming behind. And that starts with expectations, right? So when you've got someone that says, I need to get out of a business, and the conversations you're having with that person about what are we doing with the people, is there an opportunity to retrain, how are we thinking of the talent element, we as leaders have to be teaching the leaders behind us that our roles are to both think about our companies and our shareholders, but also the community, and to both set the expectations and reward that thinking. And so I think there's a real shift that has to occur. It's not just at the CEO level, but how we're bringing our leaders up.
Can I just build on that?
Final thought, I think, there, Bernard.
I also think part of our role is to either create or help to shape the narrative in our companies. And one of the things that I feel strongly about and I work on, and clearly define it in Kaiser Permanente, part of my role is not to play politics, but to be an advocate of public policy, where the intersection of public policy and health comes together. And so I advocate certain things on behalf of the organization, to your point, that has to do more with public policy than it playing politics. I stay away from playing politics, but very interested in the greater good and the role that we should play for the greater society. And that, for me, is a very important distinction to this part of the discussion.
Well, look, extremely annoyingly, we've run out of time. I could have gone on for hours. This has been extraordinarily interesting. I've learned a huge amount, and I know people watching will have done as well. And the message is loud and clear from you three that change is coming. We're not quite sure what's going to happen, but people better get ready. And make sure that it works out well for all of our companies and for society more generally. So thank you very much for sharing that. Thank you to Accenture for making this happen. And my name is William Lewis.